you guys tell us a little bit about your personal design journey? All right. Or how did you start? I think, Christian, I think you mentioned that you did you started as an illustrator, then you made your way to UX. So I guess I just want to know how was that transition?
Sure. So I started my career wanting to be the best illustrator in the world, graphic designer in the world, as with any young kid. But it was somehow self-serving, and I found to a certain extent when you're an artist, it's natural that you don't have money, and I kind of like money, so like, how can I use my skills to get money, and like how pure skills. So it ended up that you serve others, like you do services. So transition to graphic design, from illustration to graphic design, and then eventually, as with technology, I was a bit of a nerd and like tinkering with computers and everything else. Those websites, like hacking around, like tinkering with whatever's in front of me, eventually led to web design and eventually led to user experience design, because that's the new, somehow new term right now. User experience is just like designing for everyone else, and that's what I try to do right now over the last 12 years in the agency world, but more so this year, or like intentionally this year, towards one single focus, because I want to see, as much as agency work gives you breadth, I'd love to have depth. So like I'd love to see how my designs get in the hands of actual users, and what's the lifespan of that, and how can I improve other people's lives with a single focus. So that's what led me to it. Essentially, it started with just money, but eventually, like as with anything, you grow passion out of, and like aside from money, like I kind of like what I'm doing, not just for the money. Yeah. So.
Marla, you mentioned that you did not learn branding in college. So can you tell us about how you kind of started when you were studying, and then you decided one day I want to be a graphic designer? How did that transition happen?
Okay, I studied business in college because I really wanted to pursue art, but I have Asian parents who have no faith in my abilities to make money out of art. And there were some parts of my course that I ended up liking a lot. So if you went to Ateneo, I took up Comtech, and I fell in love with case studies. And if you fall in love with case studies, it means you learn how to reverse engineer companies. You start figuring out who are the founders, where did they get the capital, how did they raise funds, how do they keep a business sustainable. So that became an accidental passion in the sea of accounting, finance, and operations management. And in terms of branding, when I was a kid, I got the internet really early, like in 1996. And when you leave the internet to a 10-year-old kid, I loved it, and I saw other kids online, and I learned graphic design because I wanted to have a website. And then I got into fandoms, and how do I show my fandom? I learned Paint Shop Pro and Adobe Photoshop to display my fandom.
Any particular fandom?
When I was in high school, it was grunge music. So I wish I could say like the cool geek ones, but it was like I would make like Pearl Jam collages, Soundgarden collages. And it became useful when I was studying business, so I learned how to pixel push and do case studies. And I was just really, really lucky. The first job that I got out of college was for a branding boutique, and I didn't know what a branding boutique was. Somebody just referred me, and then I sent in their resume, and everything just came into place. It was things that I liked. There was some art, there was some business, and then I liked doing it. And with me, I have no qualm saying I like money. I like money so much because as somebody who had endeavors that was run out of sweat and volunteers, money really helps in keeping things going. So that's my origin.
Can you tell us about how you started?
I'm sorry, but cut it short. I'm in an IT firm before. I took up engineering, and then I failed it. I have a feeling that graduating classmates ko, third year pa rin ako. So I shifted to IT. And then, but before, while in school, in college, I've been into arts. Actually, wala pa yung notion that I wanted to be a graphic designer. I just do a lot of designs for, like, I remember in school I do, for example, I have a Dungeons and Dragons, so I do the manuals, I do something like that. And then I realized that when I applied to 25 by 8, it's a IT firm. So we do websites. We do like corporate websites. And then after that, Joyce and I, that's where we met my wife. So we told that it's not fun anymore since I hate routines. Actually, it became a routine. Go to office, do websites, and then go home. So we started Inksurge, I think 2002. Then, but before that, I have already a connection because we started to have project before. That was the boom of design portals around '99. So our website ranges around 800 hits per day. 800,000 hits per day. So we got around 1.5 emails per day promoting their website and so on. And then I built from there, and then we formed Inksurge out of just doing experiments online since it's a perfect platform. So the notion of business, of forming Inksurge as a business is wala sa amin yan. We just wanted to expose ourselves online. And then after pushing, after we nakadiscover, I mean, the perfect mark there was, I think, that's the start of the online Flash Film Festival, which is now big, really big. They saw our work online, mostly digital doodles, and then they invited us, hey, why don't you create design for us for our next promotions for next year? And we said yes. And then after that, we got invited to speak there in Spain. So I think yun yung mark, okay, let's leave our day jobs and we start Inksurge. We given ourselves like 6 months. If we don't have real work yet, then we find real jobs. So we just keep experimenting, it just keeps flowing, and then up to now it's been like we transitioned ourselves into Hydra now in a new office. So as I've said, I hate routine, so we've spent 8 years in our office, and now it's time to get the next energy out of it.
Yep. Karl, you design books, and you're currently a teacher. Can you sort of tell us how you balance your design as a movie poster artist, a book cover artist, and being a teacher?
Well, it's a weird balance because as a kid, I've always been into arts, and I've always also been into design. So my mother worked in an advertising agency, so I grew up in that environment. And I really grew up thinking I would be doing advertising. It felt natural. But then my mother was also very supportive of my art. So like every summer I'd take arts classes. My siblings would like take swimming and speech and whatever. So they learned all those skills I did not, but I knew how to do art. Yeah. And then since one of my siblings was also in the ad industry, so we had all these softwares in our computer, and I would tinker with it as a kid. So like I started with Photoshop 2.0, I would tinker with Grrrl, things like that. I mean, I would make greeting cards for my classmates, for my mother, and stuff like that. So I guess growing into that kind of arena, like where I'd be doing art, but I'd also be doing like journalism and publication design. It's always been that kind of push and pull, and I think both my immersion in both areas enrich each other. Yeah. So I do books, but I also do movies. I studied filmmaking. The logic of filmmaking, which I learned in school, like especially with editing and the notions of montage and storytelling, I'm able to translate into sequencing in books. And the concept of a good poster is also the concept of a good cover. They function essentially the same thing. And then right now, teaching is relatively new to me, but I've been working on my own for most of the time. So there are a lot of workflows and ideas that I kind of take for granted, but teaching kind of helps me crystallize the ideas. If I'm forced to teach someone a skill that I just kind of instinctively already know how to, then I'm forced to look at examples and historical understanding and things like that I have to translate for other people. And I think it's also very helpful for me because I become more aware of what I actually have. Yeah. So it's just balancing all those things. They kind of help each other out.
Sean.
I've always kind of grew up in a creative environment. I went through the motions of going to illustration classes and painting classes, but then the point where it really clicked for me was through music. My dad and I would really relate through like the music he was introducing me to. So he was like, making me listen to Hall & Oates and Bob Dylan and all these guys. And that was really my entry point into creativity. After that, I started delving deeper into it. And where it really clicked was through punk music. So what was interesting...
Any particular punk groups?
Well, I was into pop punk. So like Blink-182 was the starting point, but then like really delving into more post-hardcore bands like Fugazi was really life-changing. But then I think what clicked for me about like punk music was there's these guys who are maybe 4 or 5 years older than me playing music which was essentially their expression, but then at the same time they were making their own album art, they were making their own posters, they were creating merch, they were selling these things, they were selling tickets to their own shows. And I was like, for the longest time I was like thinking that, oh, art is just like this thing where you get to express yourselves, but you can't make that money back or you can't make a living out of it. But then through punk rock music, I kind of saw that, oh, there's these guys who are like, pushing their personal form of expression, but then at the same time, they're making money out of it through throwing shows, creating merchandise, and creating like this sense of brand that I was oblivious to at the time. So that facet of like that subculture of punk music also introduced me to this idea of branding, that you can differentiate yourself from other bands by communicating yourself in a certain way. So during my formative years, when I was looking at bands like maybe The Cure or The Smiths, like to most people, they were doing alternative music, UK alternative indie music, but then through the way they communicated, the way that they dressed, the way they created their album art, you could create different nuances. And through those little nuances, I was able to understand what a USP is, what a brand is. So at that point, I was differentiating The Cure from The Smiths in the sense that The Cure was a little bit more gothic, they were a little bit darker, while The Smiths was a little bit more pop and more UK alternative.
What did you identify with more?
I really like The Cure.
Okay.
Yeah, because at the time I was also listening to a lot of like emo music, so the dark kind of like branding allured was
Did you have
interesting to me. Yeah, I did. I totally had the whole hairstyle, the whole 9 yards. I was like wearing like tight pink
They just
shirts.
lit your-
And, like, music was really my entry point into this sense of like what design is and how you can make money off design and how branding can help you further your philosophy or your ethos or what you wanted to communicate.
My next question is for everybody. What are some of the challenges, in your opinion, facing the design community today? Anybody can go first.
Where to begin?
Understanding what we offer. So sometimes like the design, as everyone would know, design is something for the client can be done by their niece or their daughter, or like can be done by their 14-year-old son. Kaya mo yan. Like the design is easy, but it doesn't, like if you don't communicate it or if you don't educate whoever you're designing for, you wouldn't get the whole thing, right? You wouldn't understand that it requires strategy, it requires like empathy, it requires everything that we try to do to get to the output. Like to us, it's very outcome driven, but to everyone else, it's output driven. Like it's the end point, like the the end point of whatever our practice does, which is say a logo or a design, or which can be, if you just think about it qualitatively, it's just can be done in an hour. But if you practice it for a long time and you consider everything that goes with it, it takes like a whole career. So yeah, understanding of the value, really.
I mean, to add to that, I think it's very tricky if you're dealing with people who like to quantify something that's very hard to quantify. To give an example, when we have clients, we build in 3 revisions into the project. And I do some hand-holding. I tell them we do 3 because if I give you unlimited revisions, we're never going to meet deadlines. Also, it forces people to consolidate comments into these 3 chunks. But sometimes some people understand it, oh, I paid for these 3 revisions. Let's try to exhaust the creative to get my money's worth. Even though in my mind, but isn't it wonderful if we get it right the first time? So something like that.
So would you guys say that the problem with the design community is client side?
A lot of it is bridging with clients.
It's both. Like it's not about what we do. It's about in both ends you're executing it, and on the other end you're educating the client. Like to a certain extent, if you're internal, if you're in a brand, if you're designing within like certain constraints, you're upholding your own value, but also like trying to condense everything in your output. So it's hard to. It's not everything. Like it's not like clients from hell that it's just their fault. It's clients from hell are there because it's partly your fault because you didn't get them through. And to what she just said, is bridging the gap.
Sean, you work on your own personal brands. I guess
Right.
I'd like to ask you personally what you think the challenges of the design community are from someone who doesn't work with clients.
Right. So my whole thing is like more in an ideological sphere.
Yep.
Wherein what I see now is, and at least what I was brought up with when I went to design school, was I was really taught to embrace these very westernized aesthetics.
Okay.
So in design school, I was taught like, you know, what is effective is Bauhaus, what is minimalist. So these aesthetics were really put at a pedestal. And I think now that I'm kind of maturing, what I'm seeing now is that might not be the case, right? So what I've been obsessed with is how we can really uncover what is important about vernacular graphic design. And I think that's often put aside when we talk about graphic design in the Philippines.
Yes.
Like when we're talking about graphic design, it's always like, yeah, we're putting everything in grids, we're using Helvetica, we're using this very Western standard of what graphic design is. As an individual, what I'm trying to obsess over now is maybe there's some value in overextending typography, to distorting what you would consider perfect to fit your needs. So my whole thing now is like how can we uncover what is vernacular design and how to apply it in, you know, an international context. And really I'm trying to cite like a lot of interesting efforts now, like hard-working, good-looking, Tropicalia, Tropical Futures, where they're really trying to decolonize our notion of graphic design. So those are the things that I'm trying to obsess over. Because as much as like, you know, like I'm working on my own and this is what I think is cool and what is interesting, I'm not sure if that's an effect of my upbringing as a graphic designer, or if it's really like ingrained in our culture that, I don't know, there are things that was often put aside when I was growing up, that, you know, like this is the golden standard of what graphic design is. So from an ideological standpoint, and as a solo designer, I'm trying to see how we can uncover things within the local vernacular design, and see what truths there are that could be applied in your own concept.
Carl, you were nodding your head very vigorously.
I just tend to not. Yeah, I agree. Because I think for me there are at least off the top of my head there are two main problems that I encounter. The first is that design is usually seen as an aesthetic concern, not as something about how it works. And I think it affects both clients and designers. So clients, of course, expect you to just make something pretty and cool, and it's all about affect. But of course, we, at least in this room, I guess, we know that design is really about understanding how something works. So it's really a lot of intellectual labor, it's a lot of research and understanding that I think clients just tend to not appreciate or understand that it's all something you do. And it's a challenge not just for clients, because even designers also think that design is about making things look cool. So usually in any given design forum, it's always about how do you do this particular technique or this particular style. What do you call this style? It's always about style, when design is really not just about that. Style is just the byproduct of a real understanding or a point of view or a standpoint. So that's the major thing that I can identify, and I think it's the job of the designer to really educate both clients and fellow designers about that kind of more heavy role. And not all designers are willing to take up that role. Of course, if you just want the coolness out of it, but not the heavy lifting of the work. That's one. The second is close to what Sean said, that I think the design industry in the Philippines is very focused on design for commerce, when design has so many other functions aside from commerce. And I guess that's part of why I'm interested in design. It's I'm interested in design for understanding of history, design for human rights issues, design for awareness of our own cultural identity. There are these things that are outside the realm of business, cultural expression, things like that, that I think design has a really important role in. And because it's not money-making, or maybe it's not even cool, or maybe people just don't even think it's an actual thing that you should be thinking of, it's just not open to designers that people will go there. Of course, for me, I guess because I'm not so in love with money. I mean, I like money, but not because of accumulating it, but because of what I can do with it. And I'm very sensitive to that. So if I can imagine, if I were a student thinking, syempre with Asian parents, we all have Asian parents, may pera ba dyan, ganyan, will you be able to feed yourself and your family? Of course, these are big concerns, but I think there has to be a certain sacrifice to go out of our way, because design has such a big role, and we might just be fulfilling a very little part of it, and sayang kasi design is a really powerful tool.
Rex, don't take this the wrong way, but you have been, I think, in the design industry for the longest in this table. So I feel like you may have seen more challenges than the others. I guess I would just like to ask if there was any sort of issue that you felt was more prevalent throughout the years. What would that have been? And I apologize.
Actually, it's the finish line. It's always been. I mean, you have sometimes you have a great design. The flow is really easy with client. The process is really good. Actually, for me personally, I really screen clients. That's number one. It's not about always the money. It's always, for us, it should be changing. For example, before in the past, we did this jewelry website, and we have 10 jewelry inquiries ASAP. So I don't want to, if you're thinking about money, I mean, as we've always said before when we're starting, if we're going to that direction, I mean, mayaman na ako ngayon. It's always like that, but we don't want to mess around with it, because wala lang din yung design, so it would be in a different path. But now, the challenges would be always the finish line. Of course, I mean, at this age, it's 2019, so your expectation of client, I mean, example, even for example, business card. You see a business card, and this is aesthetic wise, but if you're a designer, you'll be dealing a lot with paper suppliers, with printers, and we're always stuck there na ang ganda na yung kaya ng Philippines. I think it's always the finish line. Within this recent project with Philinvest, it took us 2 years to work on it because we always find it hard to meet yung client, yung supplier na, or yung production team na who can meet yung parang level na gusto mo niyan.
Yeah.
So it's always, kasi sometimes design nalulost doon. Sometimes we have clients na, hey, we want this, print na natin yan, you give the logo, then sila na bahala. But for us, I mean, all throughout the years, hindi ganun. I mean, we don't give the logo. I want to know sino mo print yan. It's always important. Ano yung feel ng papel? Sa amin ba, yung word na C2S, I really hate that. Pag may nakita akong ganun ng process na C2S, na gamitin, let's pass on this project. So, it's really important for me to translate everything kasi part ng brand nila. It's always about, for me, it's always about them. So, but now it's easy actually. You can research a client. Madali na research client ngayon. We have social media. So, advantage na yung gusto niya, hate niya yung red. Okay tayo. It's much easier. And for corporations naman, it's always for us, we try to work with indirect. It's always been, Inksurge has always been like that. I don't want to talk to marketing. It's always hard for me to translate gusto namin, then they translate it to their boss, then boss gives the comment, and then balik sa amin. It's different. So I don't want to deal with that. So for us, it's always direct. So I guess we're successful at that in a way, but it's really hard for us to parang sometimes to catch the finish line.
First question. How does your art influence your design? And there are lots of artists. Yeah. Karl?
Art history but I'm really such a nerd. So I studied art and I love reading about art and looking at art. So usually my knowledge of art history extends into how I do design. Like for example, when I was doing magazines, I would always have these paintings as references for lighting or all these art historical references as specs instead of, kasi usually my colleagues are used to like looking at the work of other magazine photographers as specs, but I would like sometimes include like a sculpture, a painting, or a film, and they would be like, "Where do you get these?" And like, well, that's what I look at, and that's also what I learn from. And there are many things that you can learn from art precisely because it wasn't done under commerce, so they were really perspectives or psychological explorations or things like that, and that's what excites me about art. And I think even very good design kind of overlaps into art making.
Rex, Inksurge has done exhibitions here and abroad. I guess my question is how are you able to sort of balance your design work and your exhibition work?
Honestly, it's when we do exhibition work, it's more personal. And then usually when exhibits, we don't really put in our name Inksurge. It's just the name, but it's more of the ideas that we have as partners. So yeah, it's more personal. It's more personal for us. So it changes over time. It's more of the what's interesting for us, so that's where we go.
How different is your personal work from your design work?
Oh I have another Instagram account which is more, because in Inksurge what we did was when we started, we have different styles. Mine is more of the grunge, techno, dirty.
Grunge again. Grunge seems to be a recurring theme in this thing.
Joyce is more of the clean, it's more of typography, so it's different. And then when we formed it, we agreed to not use it as let's start new. Let's start something new that both of us would agree on. So it's a different, so it's more of a process when you start.
I guess that leads me to my next question for the table, which is how much of you is in your designs? When you make, especially for those with client work, how much of the designs that you make is you, and how much of the designs that you make is your client? Let's start with Marla.
Aesthetic-wise, I don't really have that much room to play, but then I think even my team could see it. There are some colors that I favor, I put it in there. There are some fonts that I favor, I put it in there. But my contribution would be a point of view. To elaborate on that, I'm not very religious, so I base a lot of my value system on social justice. So if I have an opportunity to introduce more inclusivity, for example, in selecting stock photos, I don't want it always white people. I don't always want it people in their 20s. Like I want an older woman, I want somebody who looks really Filipino. If I have the power to like shift it that way, I will shift it that way. Or I get a lot of food clients because that's my secret passion. I love supermarket brands. I just accepted like a long time ago that supermarkets are my happy place, and I dug in why, because supermarkets are very democratizing. It's a very democratizing arena. So I always put that in mind, that even if I have a high-end client, I make sure that even this is for rich people, I don't want it to be intimidating. And also, I still believe that brands can be a force of good, so I always put this lens of optimism in any project I do. Like I try to put fun, I try to put cheerfulness, because I'm not cynical.
CSJ, you work on UX, which I think is very much dependent on your user. So I guess I'd like to ask, how much of you is still in what you design?
It's mostly, if you define me, it's very subjective. It's very me, like to that extent. Like I love dogs, I love everything. You don't see that in the designs I do, because by definition UX is user-centric. It's not me-centric. When I try to execute UX, it comes from mostly behavioral design principles. It's like how humans are. I should understand it. I should take cues from how, say, for example, trust elements, or like, say, for example, behavioral design elements, like how you try to sell using color theory and everything else. So it's totally not me, but I would come from, say, for example, I come from experience and principles, so not much of me, but what I've learned so far representing the client. So hopefully zero, that's the idealistic version of me. I shouldn't put a corgi in a tiny corner like my dog, or like a signature, like my face. So that's the goal.
Yeah. Sean, you said that Tetsuo and Transit are practically a mix of interests and your influences.
Right.
So I guess, how much of your brands are you, and how much of it is what you think your audience likes? Like how do you sort of balance the demands of your audience to what you like? Because you do have to sell food.
Right.
So like kind of how do you balance that?
So we're in a very interesting position wherein I tread the line between being an entrepreneur and being a designer. I think first and foremost, like what I consider when I'm creating a design is really trying to please or translate what my partners want to communicate. Because at the end of the day, we're a group of like 4 different creative people, and collating our different influences together and communicating it as a brand or a product. So for me, that's really the most important thing. Because as with marriage, it's like something that you have to do together, right? So when we were creating the brand Tetsuo, for example, it was really we really had to sit down together and kind of ideate and talk about what we really wanted to do with what the restaurant was going to be. So when we were ideating, we felt that a lot of the establishments along Katipunan didn't speak or communicate in the same way that we did. So we sought to create a concept or a brand that, share the same interests in like hip hop, skateboarding, um, streetwear. So when formulating or trying to translate in a visual language what Tetsuo or Transit is all about, it's really about me communicating with my partners and trying to synthesize our values as a group and translating it into a visual language that works across all the individual partners.
My next question is a little personal. Was there ever a point in your life you wanted to stop designing? And can you tell us why? What would you be doing otherwise? Anybody can go first. Karl is laughing.
Always. No, it's just because it's so tiring. It's a lot of work. I mean, and it's usually not that visible, the work. It's a lot, it's like the projects that you have are always in your head, even if you go home. It's just there. So sometimes you just want to not think about the work that you have to do, and that's something I always have to struggle with. So, yeah. I mean, I love design. Even if I stop doing it, I will probably go back to it eventually. So it's just dealing with all this.
It's a love-hate relationship with design.
Yes.
Is there anybody in this table who has never even considered stopping design? Marla?
Me. Again, weird. And I got lucky. I really like what I do, but then I do get tired of it. And there are facets of the nature of the business that I cannot stand. Like, I would like to take a break from making decks. I hate making presentation decks. But I'm good at it, I'm fast at it, I'm very effective at it. But that's what I would want to give up so I could design more. Because it's my mode of expression. I think I'm very protective of it to the point that I make sure I have other things going on so that it's protected, if that makes any sense. Because I write, I have an advocacy, I speak, I parent, like I have a rich world outside of design that I don't put my everything on it. So I'm always happy whenever I approach design work.
You co-founded Grrrl Gang. I guess my question is, how does Grrrl Gang affect your design, and how does design affect Grrrl Gang?
Okay, design affects Grrrl Gang. So I made the logo, I made the graphics. It gave off the impression that it's a lot more professional than it really is. So yay branding, yay graphic design. They didn't know that this is just like a side hustle for me and the members. So design helps. It professionalized us. It gave people an idea of who we are, that we're a safe space, we're not judgmental. We nicknamed ourselves the preschool for feminism and social justice issues. Like if you're intimidated to go to the really hardcore issues, come here. You'll be okay here. How does Grrrl Gang affect my design work? Same. It contributes to my vocabulary. If I believe in social justice, I believe in inclusivity, I believe in highlighting women in the workplace, particularly mothers. Grrrl Gang and design allowed me to have a platform to talk about that. When I became a mom, I started talking about how men don't have to fear a slowdown in your career when you become a parent. I could see it with my husband. He was running a startup while our daughter was a year old. And he was able to keep on working and come home late. With me, my life totally changed, and I feel like I wasn't supported. So through Grrrl Gang and through my design, I could start talking about that.
I guess everybody in this table hates the word perfect, but my question was supposed to be, what is the closest you feel you have ever come to the perfect brand? Or if at least there was a brand or a design or something that you did that sort of approximated the most ideal. We're gonna do a full round, and we'll start with Rex.
Wala eh. Actually, as I've said, it takes time. Actually, I gauge it. Kasi for me, it's really dependent din sa owners eh. When you speak about brands, I mean, easily, especially now, may social media and everything, one snap, one tweet, one post, it can change everything. So it's really hard, especially if it's client work. Yeah, so it's really hard. So for us, I mean, I have a few na I can see na it's there, but I think they changed a little bit. So I can't really gauge if they're still into it.
Yeah.
So because sometimes when people approach us, they have this, and then we try to extract it. It's always a dialogue between clients. What do you want to? Why do you want to do this and everything? And then it depends on them, man. So sometimes, like for example, like for a perfect example, like the airplane that has just crashed. I mean, you've been flying with this for quite a long time, and they did a really small thing, but in terms of branding, like a trust, and then they did a mistake on the controls, and then everything fails. So the brand really parang bumaksak siya.
Yeah.
So for example, if you're working with that, it really depends on, it has a lot of aspect. I mean, like for example, si Elon Musk, one tweet, it changes everything.
Yeah.
So it's really hard, especially for a brand to say that okay, we're almost close to perfect. So,
Sean.
Yeah, I think it's really impossible to
Okay.
attain it because I feel like, at the end of the day, behind these brands are people who are always constantly maturing and evolving. Just to give an example, I think before we put up a restaurant in Katipunan, we felt that this is it. This is our selling point. Like, we're gonna be fried chicken but hip hop. This is it. But then after we put up the restaurant, it's just like people don't understand it, and the people behind the concept evolve. Like, suddenly we want to do something more mature. We want to do stuff outside of fried chicken. So how do you reconcile that?
Yeah.
So I feel like it's technically impossible to
Yeah.
achieve what you would consider a perfect brand.
Yeah.
But then I think what we should do as designers is to acknowledge that brands are always ever evolving, that they always change. As with a person, it matures, it ends up becoming something else. So I think what we're doing what I'm doing as both a graphic designer and as a brand owner is really roll with the punches, see where it goes, and at the end of the day, if it feels, or if a person is able to interact with Tetsuo as if it were a person, like, I think that in itself is quite interesting, and that in itself is like close to what a perfect brand is, just being human.
I'm gonna rephrase the question because again, I think mine, just in a way, is there a brand or something that you worked on that you love that it didn't feel like work for the last 3 years?
Okay. Karl said it. He said the perfect brand is hindi mukhang pera. And my mind has been in there. So I will give a project that I got a minimal fee. I don't know if you guys remember this production called Attraction Reaction. So they're a production that would mount gigs in Route 196, and they're friends of mine. And then the year that I started Grrrl Gang, they said, hey, why don't we put up an all-girl gig, an all-girl lineup? And I'm like, sure, that sounds really fun. So we picked favorite bands to comprise the lineup. But then it was up to me to make the poster. And then what kind of poster would I like to make? And then since you're not paying me for this is my org, this is my advocacy, I can like put all of my ideals in here. I started digging indigenous flora and fauna first, because I wanted to take pre-colonial identity to showcase na we've always had strong women before the dawn of our colonizers. I wanted to put that there. And then there's this old photograph called Sangli Girl about a Chinese mestiza. Like, I really wanted something that would scream Filipina identity, because feminism tends to be white, Western, and I wanted to examine what it would look like if we reclaimed that. So I got this vintage picture of the Sangli Girl. I gave it a riso blue look, and then with the indigenous flora sa likod, with like some pagita, pineapples, pink. And then it just felt good putting the lineup of the bands, and then we collaborated with Halia Publishing, and they showcased the female artists of their zines and their comics, put that in there. That one I felt good, and I love that. And I guess I bring up that example because it's collaborations and community work that really make me come alive, and it also made everybody else come alive. They still get excited about that poster, and if we could like channel that into my professional practice, I would have so much more fun.
Okay. Well, I do mostly books, and I think coming into this discussion, I had that moment of like doubt, like I don't really do a lot of branding projects and corporate projects, so what do I have to say? But I realized that when I do books, you're like doing branding for ideas, because you're trying to make them, package them, and make them, design them in such a way that people would want to engage with them. And usually, the designs of our books are not conducive to that. Like you just want to not leave them on the shelves. So I have two books in mind that I did before that I'm very happy with. Everyone defines brand as something that's constantly evolving. But for a book, that's it. Once you do it, that's it. And I think that's also a large part of the pressure on me when I'm doing a book, is that it has to withstand the test of time. It has to not date as easily, or if it will date, it has to be dating in a good way. It has to be something that you can live with for the next maybe 20 years, especially some of the books that I do are academic books, which might not be reprinted in a while. So you just have to, you have to kind of approximate everything that's going to happen in the future, the value that it might have. So one book that I did that I'm very proud of it's called Palaspas. So it's about the art of palm weaving in the Philippines. So I'm such a nerd for Philippine culture. So I was aware that Palaspas was neither something cool or something people really thought as worth preserving or looking into. And also, people always think that Palaspas is something Catholic. But what the book tries to say is that we have a huge diversity of palm weaving traditions in the Philippines, and it's not just Roman Catholic. So the challenge that I had to face was I had to make it look interesting, I had to make it look contemporary, that it's not like a 70s Lola kind of thing. And I also wanted it to have like the esteem that, we always teach our kids origami or all these foreign arts, but we have a lot of traditional arts that we just don't deal with because there aren't any books about them. So that a lot of it was history, but also a lot of it was like instructional. So I had to shoot a lot of the pictures myself because doing books, it's not a lot of money, and the staff are not always like designers or photographers. So it's a lot of DIY, like editors will lay out their manuscripts. So I had to like, sige po, ako na po yung gagawa ng pictures. Ganyan. Because I had to make sure that it was a passable quality that I wanted to achieve. So, and I think...
Why did you want to do that? Like, why did you decide, sige, ako na gagawa?
Well, because I love Palaspas. I love the art. Like, as even in high school, no one taught it to me, but I like rip palm leaves off the sides or like make little bookmarks out of it. And I figured like, when else in your lifetime will a book about Palaspas come together? This was it. This might be the only book about Palaspas made. You can't screw it up. Yeah. So I felt, okay, I'll do it. Okay. So I'm happy that even until now, people still know about the book, or it's still usable. It doesn't look like it was made in, oh my God, it was a decade ago. Yeah. So it's aged well, and I think I'm happy that I was able to kind of build it in such a way that it will endure. The other project I like is called, it's a book about Greca Noel Monte. So she was an engineering student at the UP, and she eventually became a New People's Army leader. So what I liked about it, there were many things in her life story that are very meaningful to me. Una, it's a story about someone who is very intelligent and who had really a bright future in a commercial sense ahead of her, but chose to take a different path, a different kind of service. And then it was also about a very strong female figure, and we don't, as Marla said, we don't have enough of those. So for me, a strong female figure is an important narrative to put out there. And then there's the story of rebels being always portrayed as like evil people who don't think, people who just take up arms because they don't think about it. But here was the story of someone who really thought about it, and she died a very violent death. And until now, the encounter, the massacre is still not resolved. But for me, it was important to kind of figure out a way to tell her life story in such a way that it would be affecting. It's not a story of defeat. It's a story that should inspire. It should be a story that could entertain. The challenge was how do you give her back the dignity and humanity even in that section of the story. So I interspersed it with like photographs of her with her child, of the rare, they had a selfie as a family. Her husband is also a political detainee, things like that. So I had to really figure out the story, and I think until now, people who I don't know or who are just encounter like raving about the book, like they always say that they feel like they got to know her very closely and that the story was very moving for them. And I think that was something I felt I was very successful in doing, because it's very hard to do that for a character like that.
Christian?
I guess like the greatest thing about the perfect brand is you always strive for it, but you'll never achieve it.
Yeah.
You'll as much as a brand is perfect for you, it might not be perfect for everyone else. It's one thing you could say is like it's deeply personal for everyone that affects it, but at various levels. Like it might be super personal to you, and the thing with humans, like we have many similarities, and as much like the more you put time into like pouring yourself, representing that brand as a designer, that's your job, right? Communicate something that only you initially would understand to everyone else, like to the masses. And for you to communicate immensely, you have to empathize, you have to understand, and then you have to translate it to everyone else. And the more you pour yourself into it, the more some people would understand. Ideally, more people would understand, like everyone would understand. But to a certain extent, nobody else outside of your, you think that like every effort you do is for the world, but in reality, it's not. People are different. People are as much the same as they are different. So your job is to communicate to this market that you don't know of, that you really have to study, and to a certain extent, you're trying to learn this like community that you don't know of. Also, you're trying to learn this brand that you don't know of.
Yeah.
So it's a hard job. It's a hard job to perfectly execute that.
Yeah.
And throughout this process of like designing, or like throughout our career, we'll have a lot of successes. We'll have like this one person that really thanks us for everything we did. But then again, there would be people from top down, like from the CEO that doesn't like, why did he pay him 50,000 for this logo? Like everybody else can do that. To the person that really resonates, your design really helped me understand this brand, or like what you're trying to do, or like get me to my next job, or like feed my family. So it could be as very valuable to a certain group of people, or it could be as like nothing to everyone else.
Last two questions. What's the best piece of design advice you've ever received? Sean? Doesn't have to be profound. It can be profound.
Design advice.
Yeah. Mine is snap to grid.
I think it's a bit tough, but yeah, I mean, in design school, like I've been taught to think of things in a very visual manner, and I think design transcends just the visual. So I think it was my girlfriend who really exposed me to. She's an industrial designer. She exposed me to design outside of something that is merely visual. So when I design now, it really is encompassing of a whole experience. So one of the best things that I've took to heart in terms of like designing a brand, designing an experience, designing any sort of touch point is to see it in a very holistic manner and to see it in terms of all the different touch points that you can experience. So aside from the visual, you can think of the sense of smell, the sense of touch, apart from the sense of sight, all of those things. So in creating my personal brands, like I don't see things as merely visual.
Yeah.
So there are certain nuances to creating an experience that smells a certain way, that feels a certain way, that creates a more holistic brand that I feel like is often underlooked as a graphic designer. So that's something I've took to heart.
I've gotten a lot of advice from many people more talented and smarter than me. I just try to absorb it and execute it. So I can't really like think of something out of like pick something out. Because I've tried to absorb it and apply it right away.
Yeah.
So maybe to a certain extent, try to seek advice because you don't know everything. As much as we know like the perfect line height, the perfect like font size and font pairing and everything else. Then the day it doesn't matter to the people that will eventually see it. It only matters to us, and to a certain extent, that's okay.
Marla.
Okay. I have a bunch of codes. So I like that you said snap to grid. So I don't know if it was Massimo Vignelli who said like grids are the underwear of design. So that's important.
Yeah.
So grids are the panty of design. I like to tell my team that if you want to go fast, you go by yourself. If you want to go far, you go together. But the one that I really adhere to in my own personal practice, I tell myself that magic happens in the tensions of things. Especially when you have to deal with a problem where they tell you, "Ooh, I want to be sexy, but I also want to be intelligent. What would that look like?" Tension. Or it's like on the outside, I am really, really good. On the inside, I am evil. What would that look like? I'm giving you really dumb examples because in your life you will always see tensions and it won't be as black and white as that. And if you try to figure out solutions that would accommodate different perspectives, different points of view, that's when you start developing and creating things that are really extraordinary.
Rex.
Well, for me, it's more of accepting mistakes. I mean, for example, we have a project, and then, for example, it's a brand, and then you're confident with it, but you have a meeting in the morning, and then it doesn't really go well. So it's more of being more of like accepting that everything it's not okay. So it's more of, it's always for me is when we encounter mistakes, it's from design to dealing with them, it's always like that. So it's more of the configuration of your mind to, okay, it's a learning curve, so next time you won't go to that top again. So for me, it's more of the mistakes that it's always like that. I mean, even if you're doing it for so long now, I mean, if you're not doing mistakes, you're doing it wrong. It's always like that. So for me, it's always accepting mistakes and learning from it, from the proposal, to meeting with them, to the language you spoke with them. Sometimes it's just one word that could turn them off, and then it's gone. So it's always the mistake. So for me, it's always.
Best design advice you've ever received?
Okay.
Karl?
The most influential insight for me was when I learned that that design is not how something looks, but how something works. Because coming from a visual arts background, the emphasis is always on the visual experience. But when I really learned that insight, I figured I wasn't just doing pages or posters, but I was creating an experience of looking, or the experience of looking unleashes other experiences as part of that looking. So when I had that kind of bigger picture kind of thinking, it empowered me in two like tension-filled ways. On the one hand, it made me value the details more. Like I always, I always pay attention to the details. But when I had that experience, insight in mind, I was able to really have a framework of looking at what kinds of details I pay attention to. Like it's not just layout details, but maybe just the texture or the shape or just the overall affect. So it broadened the kinds of details that I had to pay attention to. On the other hand, it also freed me from the visual. Like sometimes it doesn't have to be pretty, or it's not even about making it look good. Like for example, a good brand is not always about visual unity and imposing a very strict style book. It's really about the end point is really having a certain population of people really care about this idea or this concept, and having them express that affinity in their own ways. It doesn't have to look the same, but if you know that it's for the same thing, then it's a good brand. So with that idea in mind, like I figured, okay, I don't have to be so anal about the use of the logo or this particular color, as long as people care about this brand and or this idea, and then express their love for it. That's okay, and that really allowed me to pay attention to like just facilitating the design process more than just designing material. So I began to look at pub mats as just expressions of something bigger instead of just the details. Yeah.
Last question, and I guess before we move on to the questions that we received on Instagram for you.
There's more.
There's more. The last question is, if you could describe the legacy you want to leave as a designer in one sentence.
Right.
So these are your famous last words on our round table.
I'm not drunk.
So
So one sentence. We can take a cheers again. Thank you guys. Thank you. Premature.
cheers, everyone.
But yeah.
The legacy I would like to give or leave to everyone else is that I don't want to leave a legacy because design should be at the background of what it's trying to represent. So I don't want to be
No legacy.
no legacy.
Right?
I guess it's simple. Like, serve the people. Very UP, no, diba? Pero yun, parang just design for the people. There's so much you can contribute, and there's also so much that working with the marginalized sectors that can really that can really develop you as a person. So yeah, just design for the people.
Marla.
I don't know if I'll be able to do this like within the next 5 years or 10 years, but I really believe that I hope my legacy with design could help in bending the moral arc towards justice in some way.
Yeah. Shauna.
To put it simply, I want to create brands that are truly free.
Rex.
More of translating my client into it's like translating the project into a more personal one. And for me, it's once I translate it very well, I go.
Okay, thank you everybody. And that actually wraps up this question and answer portion of our talk. Thank you very much. And here we have questions from our Instagram. Alright, actually let's start with Rex. Rex, do you guys accept interns?
Actually, we have this internship program at Hydra. So let's say the deadline is yesterday. So we're not accepting. No more.
Alright, that was the funniest question. The rest are a little bit more serious, but for Karl, in the dying art of book design, what future can you predict for book designers?
Well, it's not dying.
Oh.
It's struggling, but it's not dying. Like, can you imagine gifting someone with an ebook? No. Diba? Or if you're a photographer, you have to put out a book, diba? So I think the future of the book or publication industry is that with digital, there are a lot of kinds of information that will have to be digital, but you will be more selective of what you put out as physical objects in the world. And I think the industry of physical objects will not come out soon, die out soon, and that the book is part of that.
Sean, actually, you had the most questions.
Chicken.
Sean,
Chicken.
Chicken and hip hop.
Sean, what changed and what stayed the same when you transitioned from JSEC to quotation, the outside world?
When we transitioned into a physical location outside of school, like we had to be more conscious of the way we communicated. I think whereas when we were in JSEC, it kind of just like the market came to us, just because by nature of the geography of the concept, it's right smack in the middle of like the university. All of the Konyo kids would go to JSEC, and then that was it. But then in translating like our vision outside of the context of the university, we had to be more conscious of, the way we communicated, the visuals that we put out, the kind of market that we wanted to bring over at the spot.
Yeah.
So whereas, like when we were in JSEC, it was, the market came to us. In the context of putting it outside of the university, it had to be more like conscious of like how we wanted to communicate, like how we were gonna bring people to our shop.
Last question for now. Sean, having multiple creative outputs, how do you segregate your creativity? How do you segregate your creativity between your two brands, Tetsuo and Transit?
My core competency is being able to work with a maker, if that makes sense. So with Tetsuo, I work with a chef who really has this creative vision of what he wants to put out. And then what my role as a person who brands and a person who does graphic design as a competency is to augment that and bring it to the marketplace. So that's what I do. So within the context of Tetsuo, I work with a chef who's like, I want to create a fried chicken joint that talks about hip hop, that relates to this certain kinfolk of people. And my job as a designer, as a person who brands, is to take that idea and to create it visually. Within the context naman of Transit, I have a partner who, this is what I want to say about the local fashion clothing scene. So my role is to really take that idea and create visuals and creating brand guidelines that augment his idea. So in terms of like what I do, I've already acknowledged that I'm not a maker. My whole thing is to be able to augment certain ideas from friends that I really resonate with and create, a brand, a visual that best represents their ideal.
We're going to conclude our roundtable talk. Thank you to everybody who attended. Before we go, thank you to our guests, thank you to our panelists who attended. I hope that if ever we can still continue to talk about what makes the perfect brand, if we can ever approximate, if we can ever approach. I think it's always just a matter of finding space to talk about it. Thank you, everybody, and good night.